if you look at the past 50 years under this current monetary system, the number of countries that have gone from developing to developed, you can count on like one hand. There's no countries in Latin America that went from developing developed. In fact, there's some that arguably went from developed to developing. Um, the same thing's true for Africa. We have none that went from developing to developed. And almost every single developed country today developed back under a hard money standard. But I think that the more people realize the injustice of that situation and that realize it's not just the devaluation of your savings that matters, it's also the devaluation of your unit of account that matters. I think all of that points to the importance of Bitcoin and the things that Bitcoin can fix.
Renowned macro expert and sound money advocate Lyn Alden is undoubtedly one of the biggest and most prominent Bitcoin enthusiasts. As a brilliant macro analyst with a blended background in finance and engineering, Alden has a comprehensive grasp of the brilliance of the underlying Bitcoin network and fundamentals, the many failings of the current global financial system, and how Bitcoin easily fixes them. In the countless interviews, podcasts, summits, conferences, and fireside chats Alden has appeared in over the years, as well as in her tweets and newsletters, the macro analyst has never failed to simply and intelligently communicate just how much each individual and the world needs Bitcoin. Alden recently put in another sterling performance during a recent discussion with BTC Sessions, where she analyzed just how unjust and brutal the current global financial system is. The current global fiat system centered around the US dollar favors investors in the US and the rest of the Western world, putting the populace of the rest of the world at risk of losing their wealth overnight. During the discussion, Alden points out something really important, stating that in the past 50 years, wealth distribution among the world's nations was pretty biased. Hardly any country moved from being a developing nation to a developed or high-income one. Some countries even got downgraded from developed to developing. In addition, although we are richer than we were over 50 years ago and fewer people live on very low incomes, the gap between the rich and the poor is much larger today. It is estimated that the top 1% only own about 20% of the world's wealth in the early 70s. Before 2020, that figure skyrocketed to over 50%, and it has only worsened since then. Earlier this year, Oxfam, a global poverty charity, published a report revealing that of the $42 trillion in new wealth created since 2020, $26 trillion, or 63%, went to the top 1%, while the remaining 99% of the global population collected just $16 trillion of new wealth. We will now bring you clips from the interview as Alden explains just how much the world needs Bitcoin in 2023 and beyond. Ensure you stick around to the end of the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Also, ensure you drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
I just spent 6 weeks in Egypt. I go to Egypt every single year. My husband's originally from Egypt. And so as a family, we spend part of the year in the United States, part of the year in Egypt every year. The funny thing is that my family's small, his family's very big. So our friend center and our family center is actually centered in Egypt, even as our economic center is centered in the United States. And so Egypt is very important to us. And that gives me somewhat of a perspective because in the developed world, we have, say, on average, 7% broad money supply growth. It obviously was accelerated during COVID, but on average, multi-decade average, 7% annual broad money supply growth and the various implications that come with that. Whereas when you go to the developed world, you have much higher average rates of broad money supply growth. So, for example, in the Fiat Standard book, they cited 14% weighted average broad money supply growth among developed and developing countries, which means developing countries on average are going to be on the higher end of that, so generally double digits. In Egypt in recent years, over the past decades, it's been about 20% per year. So imagine that your unit of account is increasing in supply by 20% per year almost every single year. And you're in the position of a wage earner or a small business person trying to establish pricing for your various products. That's obviously a very hard environment to operate in. So I think that the majority of Bitcoin narratives or inflation narratives are based around the idea that your savings are being devalued. So as the supply increases, your liquid savings are devalued. But I think in many ways a equal or bigger problem is that the contracts and the wages of people are constantly being devalued. So when Egypt, for example, back in 2016 and again in 2022, at the behest of the IMF, which Alex Gladstein goes into greatly in his work, when they forced Egypt to devalue their currency relative to the dollar by half, um, any Egyptian that does not get a 100% raise in that environment is now earning fewer dollar equivalents on an ongoing basis indefinitely, compared to what they used to earn. And so not only were their liquid savings devalued, so it's not like you can just say, okay, you can put your money in real estate or Egyptian equities, which are not that great, or if you find a way to put your value into American equities and hold your value, the fact that your ongoing income is still devalued is really powerful. And if you survey people and say, "Hey, are you getting a 20% raise every year? Did you get a 100% raise the fact that you were devalued by 50%?" The answer is, 99% going to be no. And to some extent, the same thing happens in developed countries, just at a less extreme scale. And so, for example, if CPI averages 2.5 or 3% per year over the long run, the realistic basket of things you want to buy that are not like fully, degraded by technology and things like that. So, for example, housing, healthcare, nutritious, like dense food, things like that, is probably increasing at 4 or 5% per year. If you're not getting that wage increase plus whatever your realistic seniority, higher productivity bonus is, you're being diluted constantly. So the the anchoring bias or the burden of proof is always against the person trying to keep up with inflation rather than the status quo, which is the employer or those that have the longer term contract. And I think that's a greatly underestimated thing globally.
Alden's new book, Broken Money, focuses on the many challenges of the current global fiat system. In the text, she gives her perspectives on how money impacts the lives of individuals and the disparity in monetary systems worldwide. She talks about how less popular and valuable fiat currencies can lead to the devaluation of savings and wages for those residing in the jurisdictions in which they are used. For example, the Venezuelan bolivar has lost 99.9998% of its value against the US dollar in the past 10 years. This means people who save in that currency basically have almost no value left after 10 short years. In her book, Alden also uses the example of Nigeria, where the inflation rate has climbed to an 18-year high of 25.8%, and the Egyptian pound, which remains one of the worst performing currencies in 2023. She finally weighs Bitcoin as one of the natural conclusions of the evolution of money and how the leading crypto asset fixes the world. During her discussion with BTC Sessions, she draws the same conclusion, stating that Bitcoin fixes the many challenges of the fiat system and subsequently a lot of the injustice attached to the system. Here's another clip from the interview.
When the unit of account is constantly working against you, and of course this only works in the current technology mix of that there's 160 different fiat currencies, more or less. The number changes every year because some of them fail, but basically, yeah, and you have 10 or 20 currencies that are relatively serious in terms of the fact that they degrade slowly over time and they have some degree of global acceptance. And then you have over 100, fiat currencies that are either pegged to the dollar and have no foreign acceptance and pegs can break, or they're totally free floating and they're constantly inflating at a faster rate. And the most damning thing is that if you look at the past 50 years under this current monetary system, the number of countries that have gone from developing to developed, you can count on like one hand, right? So Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, maybe a couple others, mostly in Asia, those are the only countries that have gone from literally developing to developed. There's no countries in Latin America that went from developing developed. In fact, there's some that arguably went from developed to developing. Um, the same thing's true for Africa. We have none that went from developing to developed. And almost every single developed country today developed back under a hard money standard, back under when gold was money. People were able to save money reliably and then deploy that capital. And in this current 50-year environment where developing countries are reliant on the dollar, The United States can harden the currency whenever they want to. They can soften the currency whenever they want to. And your currency, it's almost like a vicious cycle, because if you can issue debt in your currency is inherently more stable. If you can't issue debt in your own currency and you have to take out
Yeah.
foreign debt, your currency is less stable. And
Yeah.
so fewer lenders want to lend in your currency. It's like a vicious cycle. There's almost, other than very rare exceptions, it's hard to break out of that system. And that's the world we live in, and that's the global situation. And I find that both unjust. But I think that the more people realize the injustice of that situation, and they realize it's not just the devaluation of your savings that matters, it's also the devaluation of your unit of account that matters. I think all of that points to the importance of Bitcoin and the things that Bitcoin can fix over the very long run. I think that the unfortunate thing is that in the intermediate term, the best that Bitcoin can fix is your own personal savings. You can't expect that your unit of account is going to be fixed by Bitcoin. But in the long arc of time, if you picture a Bitcoinized world, the fact that you get benefits from going on Bitcoin now, but that you get greater benefits should the entire world become Bitcoin dominant. That's a whole nother step up.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that has to be. It's still poorly understood, and it's best to share that and educate people on these kind of injustice dynamics that exist in the current system.
Over the past few years, the clamor for a sound money system has grown, a system that will ensure a more equal distribution of wealth, giving everyone the same opportunity to grow based on their efforts and not based on a system that is specifically designed to unduly reward a small part of the global population to the detriment of others. A sound money system, especially one centered around a digital currency built on the most powerful network in the world, will help us permanently and safely move away from the current centralized system into a decentralized system that treats everyone in every country fairly based on their inputs and efforts. What do you think about Lyn Alden's interview and her assessment of the current global financial system? Please drop your comments and observations below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.